For years, Jay Leno built his legacy on charm, wit, and an easy smile, the kind that made America feel like he was everyone's favorite late-night uncle. But even the friendliest man in Hollywood carries shadows he refuses to speak about. People still remember that night in Reno, the costume contest where a young girl won first place and her twin, wearing the exact same outfit, was pushed to fourth. Leno joked about it, but behind the smile there was tension the cameras couldn't hide. Because the truth is, there has always been one person Jay Leno quietly avoids, never praises, and refuses to forgive. A man whose name he won't say, a face he won't acknowledge, and a history he has spent decades burying. The world sees Leno as the man who laughs at everything, except when it comes to him. And once you know why, you'll understand the bitterness he carried longer than any Hollywood rivalry. He once said, "It was my mistake. I trusted somebody, but they went, I made a mistake. Okay, I should pay the price. It's fine." But behind those calm words was a wound so deep it never healed. A moment burned into television history, a seat snatch so public, so humiliating, that even decades later Jay Leno refuses to forgive the man responsible. Behind the familiar smile he wore night after night was a quiet storm. A man who had reached his final limit with someone who had once been a close colleague, and who crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Jay Leno's rise wasn't an accident or a lucky break. It was the product of relentless grind, discipline, and a razor-sharp comedic instinct built over years of standing on stage under hot lights. Night after night he toured clubs across America, shaping a style rooted in everyday life, quick, observational, and sharp enough to cut through any crowd. His timing was a machine. His delivery was effortless. Producers loved him because he never cracked under pressure, whether the room was freezing or boiling, whether the audience was tired or wild. Leno always controlled the pace. One longtime editor would later say, "Jay never let the stage run him. He ran the stage." As he became a regular guest host on The Tonight Show, NBC quickly realized something. Every time Jay walked onto that set, the energy shifted. Audiences relaxed. Producers breathed easier. He wasn't flashy or unpredictable. He was consistent, reliable, and deceptively sharp. Each substitute appearance built his foundation. Each night behind the desk pulled him one step closer to the chair everyone in television quietly wanted. When NBC began planning the future of The Tonight Show, Jay wasn't just a candidate. He was the obvious successor. He didn't rely on shock value or controversy. He mastered a formula, measured delivery, broad appeal, and humor that felt familiar yet fresh. He understood that late night wasn't about chaos, it was comfort, and Jay brought comfort better than anyone else. Behind the scenes, his work ethic became legendary. While other hosts enjoyed their weekends, Jay spent his performing stand-up in small clubs, keeping his instincts sharp. He filled notebooks with jokes, observations, and ideas. He developed a mental filing system so detailed that he could scan through hundreds of topics at a moment's notice and craft monologues with the precision of a surgeon. Producers often said working with him felt like working with a man who had spent his entire life preparing for one job, and he did it without ego, without drama, and without complaint. But beneath that professionalism was a line one man crossed, a betrayal that turned a trusted colleague into the only person Jay Leno ever truly hated, a bitterness he carried quietly, but permanently. A longtime collaborator once said, "Jay understands the audience in a way you can't teach. It's like he's sitting right there beside them." And that was always Leno's secret weapon, an instinctive connection with everyday people. So when he officially took over The Tonight Show, he wasn't just stepping into a bigger role. He was stepping into a battlefield. Suddenly the workload was heavier, the pressure doubled, and the expectations were sky high. Yet Jay handled the transition like only he could. His mind processed information at lightning speed. His composure never cracked. And unlike many late-night hosts who relied on chaos or improvisation, Leno thrived on discipline. The relentless pace of nightly production didn't break him, it sharpened him. Even when NBC shifted creative teams, adjusted the show's structure, and experimented with new directions, Jay never changed his core. He stayed steady, familiar, predictable in the best possible way. That consistency gave The Tonight Show a signature tone, the Leno tone, and kept millions tuning in night after night. And years later, when NBC tried transitioning the show to someone else, only to bring Jay back after public uproar, it proved one thing: his presence still carried a gravity the network couldn't replace. Leno's hosting style was smooth, restrained, and built for mass appeal. While other late-night comedians swung between provocation and sarcasm, Leno stayed centered, safe, relatable. He wasn't chasing shock, he was chasing longevity. To stay sharp, he continued performing stand-up every week, polishing his timing in real time. This routine, the joke notebooks, the weekend shows, the disciplined prep, is what made Jay Leno unshakable. His stability wasn't an accident. It was a craft. When he finally stepped away from The Tonight Show, he didn't fade. He shifted toward his greatest personal passion, cars. With projects like Jay Leno's Garage, he kept the same trademark energy, the steady voice, the friendly presence, the gentle humor, and the audience followed him. Because at this point, Jay didn't need a network. He was the brand. But behind that polished, reliable, professional exterior lies a fracture that never healed, a line that, to this day, remains unmended, drawn by a man who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Jay in the early years of their careers, David Letterman. Letterman is the one person Jay Leno has kept at arm's length for decades, the one colleague he never forgave, never reconciled with, never allowed back into his orbit. They came from the same comedy trenches, performed in the same clubs, climbed through the same television ranks, and for a time were considered close competitors with mutual respect. But all of that ended the moment NBC announced that Jay, not David, would replace Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. That announcement detonated their relationship instantly. Letterman had been the natural successor, the man who had hosted late night for years, the favorite of the writers, and even Johnny Carson's personal choice. Carson mentioned Letterman by name in private conversations, hinting that he saw Dave as the rightful heir. But NBC saw things differently. They chose Jay. And the moment that decision was made, the dynamic of late-night television changed forever. Letterman felt betrayed by the network, by the executives, and by the industry that had once championed him. He refused to take a lesser position at NBC and instead moved to CBS, launching The Late Show with David Letterman directly opposite Leno in the exact same time slot. One moment of corporate choice turned two former colleagues into lifelong rivals, and for Jay Leno, that was the beginning of a cold silence that has lasted more than 30 years. The rivalry between Jay Leno and David Letterman didn't just play out on television, it reshaped the entire landscape of American late-night culture. After the famous split, their relationship completely collapsed. No calls, no messages, no shared interviews, no friendly appearances, nothing. For decades, both men moved like planets in the same orbit, but never once crossing paths. Letterman often referenced Leno on his show, but always with a sharp-edged sarcasm, bitterness, or thinly veiled mockery. He turned Leno's name into a punchline more than once, a reminder of wounds that never seemed to heal. Leno, however, responded with silence. He refused to mention Letterman on air, and never threw personal jabs. But his silence wasn't forgiveness, it was finality, a quiet line drawn in cement. The distance between them became as iconic as their careers. A director who had worked with both revealed that after 1993, no one in the industry dared to imagine a reunion, not even for a major anniversary. The break wasn't temporary, it was structural, intentional, maintained by both men without a single attempt at reconciliation. Through thousands of episodes, award shows, and industry gatherings, they never shook hands, never exchanged a word, never even nodded in acknowledgement. Leno summed up the entire controversy with one sentence: "I got an offer from NBC and I accepted. No excuses, no arguments, no counterattacks." But that calm statement also made one thing unmistakable. He was not interested in reopening the wound. Their rivalry stretched more than a decade, pushing both shows into a constant battle for ratings. Early on, Letterman surged ahead, fueled by public sympathy and the shock of NBC's decision. But Leno later fought his way back, adjusting content and winning over mainstream audiences until he dominated the ratings war. Still, even as they competed night after night, the ice between them remained untouched. Leno never appeared on Letterman's show, and Letterman never stepped onto Leno's stage. Even after both retired from their legendary runs, the emotional gulf stayed exactly where it had always been. The only time they appeared at the same event was at Johnny Carson's memorial, yet even there they kept their distance, standing apart like two men who had long accepted that some fractures never mend, and Letterman wasn't the only casualty in Leno's orbit. Throughout his rise at the center of the late-night universe, Leno severed several deeply rooted professional relationships, including one with a woman who helped build his empire from the ground up, Helen Kushnick, his fiercely loyal manager, the strategist behind his Tonight Show takeover, and the figure who fought harder for his career than anyone else, would soon become another name on the list of fractured alliances that Jay Leno never revisited. Jay Leno's story can't be told without mentioning Helen Kushnick, the woman who once stood so close to him that her name and his career became almost inseparable. In Leno's early years, Kushnick was not just his manager, she was his strategic weapon. She negotiated his comedy gigs, fought for every television appearance, and battled through contract rooms with a ferocity that made her both respected and feared. But when Leno finally won the Tonight Show chair, everything changed overnight. NBC fired Kushnick almost immediately, alarmed by her aggressive tactics behind the scenes, tactics that included pressuring bookers, threatening producers, and using Leno's rising power as leverage to corner departments into giving him priority. Internal memos documented her behavior, and when she was pushed out, it was swift, silent, and total. No farewell, no final meeting, no public acknowledgement from Leno. A producer later revealed that once Kushnick was gone, her name became taboo. No one mentioned Helen around Jay, he recalled. It was like he built a wall the moment she walked out. Leno never criticized her publicly, but his silence, the absolute refusal to reconnect, was louder than any statement. The partnership that had elevated him ended in a clean, cold break. Another fracture came years later, one the entire nation watched unfold in real time: the Conan-O'Brien conflict. In 2009, after decades on The Tonight Show, Leno stepped aside so Conan could inherit the iconic desk. For a brief moment, it seemed like a graceful transition. Leno worked on his primetime experiment. Conan took over 11:35, and NBC promised a new era. But when Conan's ratings struggled, the network panicked and brought Leno back. That single decision detonated one of the biggest controversies in TV history. Conan was pushed out, paid off, and forced to leave NBC entirely. Fans blamed Leno instantly, painting him as the man who took back the show he had already given away. Leno insisted he simply accepted what the NBC executives offered and made no demands. But after that day, the relationship between the two men froze solid. They never shared a stage again, never appeared in interviews together, and never acknowledged each other beyond carefully measured comments. To the audience, it became clear Conan's exit had opened a wound that neither man wanted to revisit. The fractures didn't stop there. Over the years, a handful of well-known personalities clashed with Leno, and the media took every opportunity to highlight those tensions. Howard Stern became one of his loudest critics, repeatedly attacking Leno on air. Stern accused him of lacking originality, copying other comedians, and relying on safe, recycled humor instead of pushing boundaries. It was a feud that often turned personal, with Stern branding Leno as a man who played it safe and never made real comedy. Leno never fired back. He stayed true to his pattern: silence, distance, and an unbreakable poker face. But beneath that calm exterior was a long record of broken alliances, burned bridges, and relationships that could never be repaired in later years. Howard Stern became one of the loudest critics to ever speak Leno's name on air, and he never held back. In one interview, Stern remarked sharply, "Jay Leno is the symbol of doing just enough, ever exceptional, never daring." His tone was biting, meant to sting. Yet even with such direct provocation, Leno refused to respond. He did not fire back, did not defend himself, did not engage in the war of words that dominated entertainment headlines. Instead, he kept to the same quiet strategy he had practiced for decades: silence, distance, and absolute control over his public image. He never mentioned Stern, never addressed the feud, and never allowed the conflict to spill into his on-air presence. In a world driven by controversy and drama, Leno chose invisibility over retaliation. Each of these conflicts left unmistakable marks across his career: fractures with Letterman, the cold fallout with Conan, the silent dismissal of Kushner, the tension with Stern. None of them derailed his success, but they revealed a truth hidden beneath Leno's friendly television persona. He was a man who built strong walls, managed relationships with caution, and shut the door completely once trust was broken. When seen together, these moments form a roadmap of how Leno survived the ruthless world of late-night television, not through confrontation, but through calculated distance. Yet despite the conflicts, Jay Leno's influence on American television remains impossible to deny. For nearly 30 years, he shaped the rhythm and structure of late-night programming, turning The Tonight Show into a consistent, dependable viewing experience for millions of Americans. When he stepped behind Carson's desk, he didn't try to reinvent the format or chase trends. Instead, he mastered a simple, steady formula: an opening monologue rooted in everyday news, a middle act built on warm interviews, and a closing bit crafted to end the night on a softer note. While other hosts leaned into political commentary or sharp satire, Leno remained unpolarizing and universal, choosing jokes about daily life over divisive headlines. That approach created a loyal audience that followed him through changing eras and shifting networks. Even at the height of competition with Letterman, and later with rising comedians like Jimmy Kimmel, Leno consistently delivered ratings that kept NBC at the top. One of Leno's quietest yet most lasting contributions was his habit of giving new comedians their first national platform. He frequently opened the early segments of The Tonight Show to unknown comics, offering them a stage that could change their careers overnight. Many later admitted that a single appearance on Leno's show became the turning point of their lives. He never advertised this effort, never sought credit, but he kept doing it week after week, year after year, building a legacy that quietly shaped the next generation of performers. After he finally stepped away from The Tonight Show, Leno didn't disappear from public life. Instead, he returned to a lifelong passion. Jay Leno's Garage became his new home, a show where engines, craftsmanship, and real-world storytelling replaced celebrity interviews and scripted jokes. Yet even in this completely different format, Leno's style remained unmistakable. His delivery stayed steady, approachable, and his curiosity guided the conversations. His love for mechanics brought authenticity, and his ability to make every viewer feel included kept the show engaging across all ages and backgrounds. It became clear that the platform never defined Jay Leno. His discipline, consistency, and grounded personality did, through every chapter of his career. From bitter rivalries to overwhelming success, one truth stands out: Jay Leno's mark on American television is permanent. His style became a blueprint, his steadiness became a standard, and his legacy, built on discipline rather than scandal, continues to shape the late-night landscape long after he walked away from the iconic desk. Through this program, Leno reached an entirely new generation of viewers while still holding on to the loyal audience that had followed him since his Tonight Show days. His trademark consistency didn't just define his shows, it defined his public identity. Throughout his decades in the spotlight, he avoided reckless statements, stayed far from scandals, and lived by a schedule so steady it became part of his persona. That predictability built trust. Viewers felt they knew exactly what they would get from Jay Leno: humor without controversy, warmth without chaos, and a nightly presence that never wavered. It was this stability that convinced NBC to keep him at the center of American primetime for so many years. Jay Leno's true legacy isn't simply measured in the millions of viewers who tuned in, or the record-breaking number of episodes he hosted. It lies in how he redefined the very idea of safety in entertainment, not as sameness or caution, but as reliability, discipline, and absolute control over the tone of his work. In his hands, safety became a strategy, a foundation, and a signature. Long after his departure, that formula still shapes the blueprint of late-night television. Yet beyond the screens and spotlights, few truly understand the man behind the polished presence, his roots, his grind, and the personal discipline that molded him into one of television's most enduring figures. Tell a story far deeper than the cameras ever captured. Born in 1950 in New Rochelle, New York, and raised in Andover, Massachusetts, Leno came from a modest background. His mother was Scottish, his father Italian, a hard-working insurance salesman who instilled in Jay the value of persistence. In school, teachers once warned he might fail a grade, but he pushed through, eventually graduating from Emerson College with a degree in communications. It was during those college years that he first stepped onto a comedy stage, performing in tiny clubs with nothing but determination and a notebook full of observations. Leno built his comedic voice from the streets and everyday life, avoiding politics and shock humor, focusing instead on moments everyone could understand. That universality became his greatest weapon. Slowly, he climbed from small clubs to regional circuits, and then to national TV, simply because audiences felt he was one of them, a regular guy who could make anyone laugh. Unlike many entertainers of his era, he didn't turn to alcohol, drugs, or the wild nightlife of fame. He worked weekends, rewrote jokes during the week, and lived quietly off stage. That relentless discipline became the backbone of his career, sharpening his timing and mental stamina long before he landed behind the Tonight Show desk. In 1980, Leno married Mavis Nicholson, a private, principled activist focused on women's rights in parts of the world where freedoms are restricted. Their marriage, low profile and deeply grounded, became another anchor in Leno's life. They never sought the spotlight, never chased children for publicity, and chose stability over spectacle. Leno often said his wife was the steady force that kept his life organized and his priorities clear. Ultimately, Jay Leno's story is one of work, endurance, and a deep instinct for self-preservation. He lives quietly, keeps to a disciplined routine, and maintains strict boundaries with those who have crossed him. For him, real conflict isn't about public arguments or dramatic confrontations. It's about the long, unwavering silence that follows betrayal. And in Jay Leno's world, silence is permanent. If this journey has given you something to reflect on, or if you want more untold Hollywood truths, make sure to like the video, share it with friends, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe kept Jay Leno silent for all these years? We'd love to hear your take.